Every month, a stranger transferred $5,000 to me. This went on for 7 years, and I never knew who he was. But one day, the bank called. "Ma'am, the stranger has transferred $27 million to you and left a message." When I found out, good day, dear listeners. It's Anna again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I never considered myself a lucky woman. Lucky women married well, drove new cars, and didn't count change at the grocery store checkout while the line behind them grew impatient. I was Sarah Mitchell, 41, divorced, a part-time bookkeeper for a dental practice in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the sole owner of a house that needed a new roof and a water heater that had been making a grinding noise since 2014. My daughter, Lily, was 12 when all of this began. My son, Caleb, was 9. Their father, Derek, had relocated to Phoenix with a woman named Briana, who did Pilates and didn't have stretch marks, and his child support payments arrived with the reliability of a broken clock. Right twice a month if I was fortunate. That was my life in October of 2016. Nothing extraordinary, nothing poetic about it, just the particular exhaustion that accumulates in a woman who's been holding everything together for so long that she can no longer remember what it felt like to let something go. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, the kind of cold gray October Tuesday that smells like wet leaves and overdue bills, when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. I assumed it was the dental practice paycheck, deposited 2 days late as usual. I picked up the phone without urgency, but the number on the screen made me set down my coffee mug. Deposit received, $5,000, 0 sender private transfer. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I opened the banking app and navigated to the transaction details. There was no name, no memo, no account number visible to me, just the phrase private wire transfer and a reference code that meant nothing. I called the bank's after hours line immediately. The automated system confirmed the deposit was real, cleared, and available. A representative told me that the sender had specifically requested anonymity, and that the bank was legally obligated to honor that request. But someone just sent me $5,000, I said, aware of how absurd that sentence sounded. Yes, ma'am, that is correct. I waited 3 days for something to happen, for someone to call me and say it was a mistake, for the money to disappear, for a Nigerian prince to email me instructions. Nothing happened. The money sat in my account still and silent as a stone at the bottom of a lake. So I used it. Lily needed new winter boots. The water heater repair estimate was $340. I paid 2 months ahead on the mortgage, because I had never in my adult life paid 2 months ahead on anything, and doing so felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The following month on the 14th, a Monday, another notification arrived. Deposit received, $5,000, 0. Sender private transfer, same reference format, same anonymity. I called the bank again. They confirmed it was from the same source. No new information. By the 3rd month, I had stopped calling the bank. By the 6th month, I had stopped flinching when the notification appeared. By the end of the 1st year, $5,000 on the 14th of each month had become as reliable as sunrise. More reliable, in fact, than anything else in my life at that time. Who sends a stranger $5,000 every month without explanation? That question lived in me the way a low-grade fever lives in the body. Present, persistent, impossible to fully ignore. I told no one. Not my mother in Charlotte, not my best friend Dana, not my sister Karen, who would have immediately insisted I report it to the IRS and the FBI and probably the Pope. I kept it to myself and used the money carefully. The roof in 2017, Caleb's braces in 2018, a modest college savings account for both children starting in 2019, 7 years, 84 months, $420,000 total, arriving like clockwork, reshaping my life in ways I was almost afraid to acknowledge, because acknowledging them felt like pressing on a bruise. And then on the morning of March 14th, 2024, my phone rang. The number on the screen read First Carolina Bank Priority Customer Line. That was unusual. I had never received a call from that line before. Miss Mitchell, a woman's voice, formal and careful. This is Christine Hale from First Carolina Bank. I'm calling because an extraordinary transfer has been made to your account this morning. The amount is $27 million. She paused, and the sender left a message. Ms. Mitchell. He said you would want to know who he was. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, not in a chair, but directly on the floor because my legs simply stopped working. 7 years and now finally a name. I sat on that kitchen floor for what must have been 20 minutes. Christine Hale from First Carolina Bank waited with professional patience, asking me twice if I was still on the line. I just couldn't speak yet. The message, she told me, had been attached to the wire transfer as a text document. She read it to me slowly, pausing between sentences as though she understood I would need time to absorb each one. My name is Robert Calloway. You do not know me, but I know you. 12 years ago on a February night in downtown Raleigh, you stopped on the sidewalk outside Calloway Hardware on Fayetteville Street, my store, though you did not know it, and you gave a man sitting in the cold a cup of coffee, a sandwich from the bag you were carrying, and you sat with him for 11 minutes on a concrete step while the temperature dropped below freezing. You did not take out your phone. You did not look uncomfortable. You simply sat with him. That man was me. I had lost my wife 6 months before and had walked out of my own building in a daze, forgetting my coat, forgetting everything. I was not homeless. I was grieving and invisible. And you saw me anyway. I never forgot. I am dying now. Everything I have left, I am leaving with you. The lawyers will contact you, Robert. I remembered that night. Of course, I remembered it. Not because I thought anything of it at the time, but because the man had seemed so utterly lost that I'd felt a physical pull toward him, the way you feel a pull toward a child who has dropped their ice cream on the sidewalk. He had salt and pepper hair. He'd thanked me in a voice that cracked on the second syllable. I had thought about him for a few days afterward, wondered vaguely if he was all right, and then life had carried me forward the way life does. That man had been Robert Calloway, the owner of Calloway Hardware, a regional chain with 14 locations across North Carolina and Virginia, which I later learned had been sold to a national retailer in 2021 for a sum that the business press described as substantial. He had no surviving spouse. His estate after taxes and charitable bequests, specified in his will, included the $27 million now sitting in my account. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at the wall, and then the fear arrived. Not the small, manageable fear of a bounce check or a missed deadline, but the large, cold, structural fear of a woman who suddenly understands that her life has changed in a way she cannot undo, because $27 million is not a windfall. It is a target. It is a declaration. It is the kind of number that makes people behave in ways they wouldn't otherwise behave. I thought of Lily, who is now 19 and in her first year at UNC Chapel Hill. I thought of Caleb, 17, quiet and methodical, who wanted to study engineering. I thought of the roof I had finally replaced, the mortgage I had finally paid off 6 months ago, with the accumulated savings. I had built something careful and small and mine. And now this. The lawyers contacted me the following morning, a firm out of Greensboro, Harmon Bass and Whitfield. A man named Gerald Bass spoke to me in the measured tones of a professional who has delivered large sums of money to surprise people before. He confirmed the transfer. He confirmed the will. He told me that Robert Calloway had updated his estate documents 18 months prior following his terminal cancer diagnosis, and that the bequest to me was unambiguous, witnessed, and ironclad. Are there other heirs? I asked. There was a brief pause that told me everything before Gerald Bass said a word. Mr. Real Calloway had 2 adult children from his first marriage, he said carefully. A daughter, Victoria Calloway Reed, and a son, Marcus Calloway. They were informed of the estate distribution last week as required by law. And how did they react? Another pause. Miss Mitchell, I would strongly recommend retaining your own legal counsel before speaking with anyone connected to the Calloway family. 3D I hung up and sat with that sentence for a long time before speaking with anyone connected to the Calloway family. Not a casual recommendation, a warning dressed in polite language. I went to my laptop and typed the names. Victoria Calloway Reed, 44, a former real estate developer in Charlotte, currently involved in 2 pending civil suits over a failed condominium project. Marcus Calloway, 41, lived in Greensboro, had reportedly been estranged from his father for at least 8 years, according to a brief mention in a 2019 local business profile of Robert. Children who had been estranged from a dying father, who chose to leave $27 million to a stranger who had once given him a sandwich. How angry would that make you? Be honest with yourself. How absolutely incandescent with rage would that make you? I knew then, sitting at my kitchen table in Raleigh, staring at photographs of people I had never met, that this was not over. This was barely the beginning. And I had two choices. I could be frightened and passive, and hope that good legal documents would protect me. Or I could be deliberate. I could be strategic. I could build something they couldn't dismantle. I opened a new document on my laptop, and I started to plan. The first item on the list was the name Gerald Bass had recommended. Find your own attorney today. I found her through Dana, my best friend, who had gone through a brutal custody dispute 4 years earlier and emerged from it with the calm, battle-tested expression of a woman who had learned exactly which lawyers in Raleigh fought to win. Her name was Patricia Okafor, a partner at a small civil litigation firm on Glenwood Avenue. A woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of deliberate stillness that made you believe she had already considered every scenario before you finished describing your problem. I sat in her office on a Friday afternoon and laid everything out on the table. The 7 years of transfers, the call from the bank, Robert's letter, the Calloway children, Gerald Bass's warning. Patricia listened without interrupting. She made 3 notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me directly. The will is valid, she said. Robert Calloway had full legal capacity at the time of signing. 2 independent witnesses and a notary. His estate attorneys filed everything correctly. A contest based on capacity will fail. She paused. However, Victoria and Marcus Calloway will almost certainly file a contest regardless. Not because they expect to win, because litigation is expensive and exhausting, and they may be calculating that you'll settle to make it stop. I won't, I said. Patricia looked at me for a moment. Good, she said simply, and wrote something else on the pad. She filed a formal response to the estate on my behalf that same week, establishing my legal claim and signaling to the Calloway family's attorneys that I was represented and prepared. Within 48 hours, I received the first phone call. It came to my personal cell phone, a number I had not given to anyone connected to the estate. The caller ID showed a Charlotte area code. When I answered, the voice was smooth, calibrated, and immediately familiar in the way that certain voices are familiar, because you recognize the type before you know the person. I'm Miss Mitchell. This is Victoria Calloway Reed. I hope I'm not disturbing you. She was disturbing me enormously, but I said nothing. I just wanted to reach out personally, Victoria continued, because I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I believe reasonable people can resolve this without turning it into something ugly. Her voice had the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to negotiating from a position of assumed superiority. Mitty, my father was ill. He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. We have documentation that suggests his judgment was compromised. I'm sure you understand. This is a family matter. I understand that your father made a legal decision about his own estate. I said, my voice was steadier than I expected. A small pause. Ms. Mitchell, we're prepared to offer you a settlement. Something fair. Something that acknowledges your relationship with my father without you should direct any further communication to my attorney. I said. Patricia Okafor. Her office number is on the public record. I ended the call. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down, but not from fear, from something closer to recognition. Victoria had called my personal number, which meant she had accessed it from somewhere. A background check, a data broker, perhaps something less legal. That was the first thing that told me who I was dealing with. The second thing came 3 days later, and it was the piece of evidence that changed everything. Patricia called me on a Wednesday morning, her voice carrying the particular restrained energy of someone who has just found exactly what they were looking for. She had hired a private investigator, a standard precaution, she explained, in contested estate cases, and the investigator had been looking into the Calloway siblings' financial records as they pertained to the estate. What he found was this: 8 months before Robert's death, Victoria and Marcus had jointly petitioned a probate court in Guilford County to have their father declared mentally incompetent and to have themselves appointed as his legal guardians. Robert had fought the petition with his own attorneys. He had undergone 3 independent psychiatric evaluations. All 3 evaluators found him fully competent. The petition had been denied. They tried to take control of his finances before he died, I said slowly. They tried and failed, Patricia confirmed, and the timing matters. Robert updated his will to include you 4 months after that petition was denied. The attorneys at Harmon, Bass, and Whitfield have confirmed this sequence. It is our belief that Robert specifically chose to accelerate your bequest and structure it the way he did because he knew his children would contest it. He was protecting the gift. I sat with that for a long, quiet moment. Robert Calloway had known what his children were. He had seen it clearly, the way a man who has built a business from the ground up learns to read the character of the people around him. And in the last year of his life, facing a terminal diagnosis and a failed guardianship attempt by the 2 people who should have been caring for him, he had thought back across 12 years to a cold February night and a woman on a concrete step. He had trusted me, a stranger, because I had been kind without calculation, without expecting anything in return. And his children, the people who had tried to strip him of his autonomy while he was still alive, were now going to court to strip me of his final gift. I thought about that for a long time that night, standing at the kitchen window while the March dark settled over the neighborhood. Was I angry? Yes. But beneath the anger was something quieter and more durable. I was ready. Patricia's strategy was methodical, and she explained to me deliberately public in certain key respects. When people operate in the open, she told me during our second meeting, it becomes much harder for the other side to apply pressure without it looking like exactly what it is. The first move was filing a comprehensive response to the Calloway's estate contest in Wake County Probate Court, attaching the psychiatric evaluation records, which were public court documents, establishing that Robert had been found fully competent, not once, but 3 times by independent professionals. Patricia attached a timeline: the failed guardianship petition in August, the psychiatric evaluations in September and October, the updated will in December, Robert's death in January 2024. The document told a story without requiring a single editorial comment. The story was clear. The second move was a letter sent from Patricia's firm to the Calloway's attorney, David Fenwick of Fenwick and Pryor in Charlotte, formally requesting all communications between Victoria Marcus and their father's estate managers going back 3 years. This was a standard discovery request, but the timing of it arriving the same week as our court filing was intended to signal something. We know where to look. I was not in the courtroom for the filing. I was in my kitchen in Raleigh, making Caleb's lunch before school, living my life as deliberately normally as I could manage, because I had learned that the greatest source of stability during crisis is routine. But Patricia called me at noon to confirm everything had been submitted. How did Fenwick respond? I asked. He asked for a 60-day extension on discovery, she said. I denied it. I felt something that was close to satisfaction. Close, but not quite. Because I had learned by then not to feel satisfied too early. I was right to be cautious. The escalation came on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the court filing. I was in the parking lot of a grocery store in North Raleigh, loading bags into my car, when a black SUV pulled into the spot beside mine. The passenger window rolled down. Marcus Calloway was sitting in the passenger seat. I had seen his photograph enough times by then to recognize him immediately. Heavy-set 50-ish with a particular expression of a man who has spent a lifetime expecting the world to rearrange itself for his convenience. You should think carefully about what you're doing, he said. His voice was low, not quite threatening in a way I could record and play back to prove anything. My father was not a well man. You took advantage of a grieving, confused, elderly person, and a jury is going to see that. Your father was found competent by 3 psychiatrists, I said, I was proud of how level my voice was. Juries don't read psychiatric reports. Juries see a stranger who showed up and walked away with $27 million. He let that sit for a moment. There's a settlement offer on the table. $2 million clean. No publicity. He paused again. Think about your kids, Miss Mitchell. Think about how complicated things can get. That last sentence, think about your kids, was the sentence that sealed it. Not because I believed he would harm my children. I didn't think he would go that far, and that wasn't the kind of family they were, but because he had said it deliberately knowing it would land using my love for my children as a lever. That was who Marcus Calloway was. That was the full picture. Move your car, I said. Or I will call the police and report this as intimidation with your license plate number and the time and location on record. He stared at me for a moment, then the window rolled up and the SUV backed out. I sat in my car for 5 minutes before driving home. My hands were steady on the wheel. But when I got inside, I locked the front door, activated the security camera app on my phone, and called Patricia. She listened to everything, asked 3 specific questions about what had been said, and told me to write it all down in a dated document and email it to her that night for her records. Is there anything actually illegal in what he said? I asked. Borderline, she said. But the pattern of behavior, the personal phone call from Victoria, now that pattern matters. We document everything. After I hung up, I went to Caleb's room. He was at his desk, headphones on, working through a calculus problem set. I stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at him. He didn't know any of this was happening. Lily was at college. They were both safe. They were both fine. I decided that weekend I would go nowhere and do nothing. I took Caleb to his soccer game on Saturday morning and stood on the sideline in the cold April air and cheered and clapped and drank bad coffee from a thermos. On Sunday, I drove to Charlotte and had lunch with my mother at her kitchen table and didn't say a word about any of it. Just ate her chicken soup and listened to her talk about her garden and let the normalcy of it hold me up. I needed those 2 days because what was coming next required everything I had. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, a Greensboro area code. On a Monday morning, 10 days after the parking lot encounter with Marcus, the woman on the line introduced herself as Diane Ashworth, and she described herself as a conflict resolution specialist retained by the Calloway family. I knew immediately what this was, not mediation in any legitimate sense. There was ongoing litigation. Formal mediation would have gone through the court. This was a private approach, soft and plausible sounding, designed to bypass Patricia and get me alone in a conversation where I might say something they could use or agree to something I couldn't easily undo. I appreciate the call, I said pleasantly. Please contact my attorney, Patricia Okafor. She handles all estate matters. I completely understand, Diane Ashworth said, her voice warm and faintly sympathetic, the voice of a woman paid to sound like she's on your side. I just want to mention this process is going to be very public. Addie court documents become part of the public record. Details about your finances, your relationship with Mr. Holloway, how you met, all of that becomes available. I imagine you'd prefer to protect your privacy, your children's privacy. There it was again, the children. I'll let my attorney know you called, I said, and hung up. I didn't feel rattled. I recognized in some clear part of myself that the very fact that they were making these approaches meant that their legal position was weaker than they wanted me to believe. People with strong cases go to court. People with weak cases try to get you to settle before you understand how strong your position is. I filed a note about the call in my running document, sent it to Patricia, and made myself a second cup of coffee. But I was alone in that house, and I want to be honest about what that felt like. The legal position was solid, the evidence was solid. Patricia was exceptional. And yet there is a particular loneliness in fighting something large by yourself in a kitchen in North Carolina, not wanting to alarm your children, not wanting to worry your elderly mother. The aloneness of it had weight. I called Dana that afternoon. We had been friends since the Lily and Caleb and diapers years, since the neighborhood playgroup era when our children were small and our marriages were still intact, and we gathered in each other's kitchens and talked about everything. Dana had been through her own version of this. not money, but a custody fight that had stripped her bare and rebuilt her into someone harder and more precise. She knew what it felt like to be a woman standing in the middle of something that other people were trying to decide for her. I told her everything, all of it. Robert's letter, the callaways, the parking lot, the conflict resolution specialist. She listened without interrupting, the way she always had, and when I finished, there was a pause and then she said, "Sarah, you are not going to lose this." "I know," I said, and I did know. But knowing and feeling are different rooms in the same house, and I'd been locked out of the second one for weeks. "Do you need me to come over?" she asked. "No," I said. "I just needed someone else to know." She came over anyway, 40 minutes later, with wine and a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, and we sat at my kitchen table until midnight. She didn't offer advice or strategies or action items. She just sat there across from me, and that was enough. That was honestly more than enough. Her presence reminded me of something important, something I had known intellectually but had not felt until that evening. I was not starting from nothing. I had built a real life. I had people. I had children who were flourishing. I had a home I owned outright. I had 7 years of careful, sensible decisions behind me, and 27 million in front of me, and a lawyer who I would trust with my life. Victoria Calloway Reed had a failed real estate project and 2 pending civil suits. L. Marcus Calloway had been estranged from his dying father for 8 years. I poured a second glass of wine and thought about that contrast for a moment. And somewhere in Greensboro, in Charlotte, I knew they were watching me, waiting for me to crack, to settle, to disappear quietly. Their attorney was almost certainly advising them that their case was not strong, while billing them generously for the privilege of that advice. Their conflict resolution specialist had reported back that I was unresponsive. Their parking lot intimidation had produced nothing but a dated email in Patricia's files. They were watching, but I was not moving. 6 weeks after the parking lot encounter in early May, I received a handwritten note in the mail. It was on cream-colored stationery, the kind that signals that the writer has spent money specifically to look like someone who doesn't need to try. The handwriting was large and looping. The note was from Victoria Sarah. "I wonder if we might simply meet for coffee as women, as human beings, not as lawyers, not as adversaries. My father was a complicated man, and I think we both deserve to understand each other better. Please consider it. Victoria Calloway Reed." I photographed the note, sent it to Patricia, and then against Patricia's mild professional reluctance, and with her full knowledge and preparation, I said yes. I want to be clear about why. Not because I trusted Victoria, not because I believed for a moment that this was genuine. I said yes because I wanted to look at her directly. Because I had been a piece on this board that other people were moving, and I wanted to sit across from the person who had tried to strip Robert of his legal personhood while he was still alive. And I wanted to see who she was with my own eyes. We met at a coffee shop in Cary on a Thursday afternoon. Neutral territory, public, well-lit. Victoria arrived 3 minutes after I did, which told me she had been watching for my arrival. She was tall, expensively dressed, with a kind of groomed, composed appearance that takes significant daily effort to maintain. She smiled when she saw me, a smile calibrated to warmth, and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I mean that." We ordered coffee. For the first 5 minutes, she talked about her father, about his stubbornness, his difficulty showing affection, the ways his grief over his late wife had changed him. She was good. She wove just enough real emotion into it to make it feel authentic. The grief of a daughter talking about a complicated father. She was performing for me, but she was a skilled performer. "He became very susceptible toward the end," she said finally, setting down her cup. "Lonely people are. They latch on to kindness. They misinterpret connection." She looked at me with an expression that was designed to read as sympathetic. "I don't blame you, Sarah. I want you to know that I don't believe you set out to manipulate him." There it was, the accusation dressed in absolution. "I met your father once," I said. "I gave him a sandwich and sat with him on a step for 11 minutes. He was in a fragile state for years after my mother died," Victoria said smoothly. "He wasn't thinking clearly. A jury will." Your father was evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists. I said all 3 found him fully competent. Your guardianship petition was denied. That's documented public record. Something shifted in Victoria's face so briefly that you might have missed it if you weren't watching carefully. A tightening around the eyes, a compression of the lips. We all interpret these things differently, she said, and her voice had changed by a fraction of a degree. I think your attorney has told you that the contest is unlikely to succeed, I said. I think you're here because you hoped I would be easier to manage in person than on paper. The warmth disappeared completely. Then, Victoria set down her coffee cup with a precision that was its own kind of anger. You are making a serious mistake, she said. Her voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if she had raised it. You don't understand what we're capable of. We will make this so expensive and so public and so drawn out that you will spend the next 4 years of your life in legal proceedings. We will depose everyone you know. We will put your finances under a microscope. We will question every decision you've made since the money started arriving. Is that what you want? For your children to watch their mother dragged through a public court battle? I looked at her across the table. I thought about Robert sitting on a concrete step in February, coat forgotten, grief hollowed, invisible to everyone who walked past him. I thought about this woman, his daughter, trying to have him declared incompetent so she could control his money before he died. Victoria, I said calmly, you and your brother attempted to strip your father of his legal rights while he was dying. He fought you. 3 doctors said he was competent. He then specifically chose to leave his estate to someone outside your family. That story told in a courtroom is not going to make either of you look like grieving children who were robbed. It's going to make you look exactly like what you are. She stood up, her chair scraped back, and several people at nearby tables glanced over. We'll see each other in court, she said. Yes, I said, we will. She left. I sat for a moment, finishing my coffee, and the fear that moved through me afterward was real. I won't pretend otherwise. She was not wrong that litigation was expensive and exhausting. She was not wrong that they could make things difficult, but the fear had a quality to it that surprised me. It was fuel. Every threat they made told me exactly how much they needed me to back down. And I was not going to back down. I paid for both coffees and drove home. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd week of June in Wake County Probate Court. A contest hearing, the Callaways' formal challenge to Robert's will, specifically the bequest to me. Patricia had told me from the beginning that the case was strong and the contest was weak. But she had also told me in her precise and unsentimental way that the hearing itself would be uncomfortable. Expect them to paint you as an opportunist, she said. Expect emotional testimony. Prepare yourself for that. I prepared myself. What none of us had fully anticipated, though Patricia had suspected it, was what David Fenwick, the Callaways' attorney, would try to do in the 48 hours before the hearing. He filed a last-minute motion to introduce new evidence, a series of alleged financial transactions that he claimed demonstrated a pattern of contact between me and Robert Callaway prior to the official transfer records. The implication was that I had known who Robert was, had cultivated a relationship with him deliberately, and had in some way engineered the bequest. It was a fabrication, and it was a sloppy one. Patricia had the motion dismissed within 6 hours, presenting communication records from Robert's own estate attorneys, confirming that Robert had specifically instructed them never to disclose his identity to me. She also presented the investigator's report, which included timestamp data on every interaction Robert had initiated, all of them unilateral, all of them anonymous, every single one of them directed from him to me and never the reverse. Robert had found me. Robert had found my bank account. Robert had chosen every step of this. 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. My husband's daughter walked in with her husband, dragging 2 huge suitcases. Dad said, "We're moving in." Before I could speak, she shoved a list into my hand. Breakfast at 6 a.m., no greasy food. Fresh sheets every week, clean the bathroom every night, hand wash our work clothes, iron them, hang them, never fold them. I looked at my husband. He said nothing. I smiled. Okay. At exactly 6 a.m. the next morning, breakfast was on the table. Not almost ready, not warming in the pan, ready. 2 plates of egg whites sat beside sliced strawberries and dry wheat toast, with coffee poured into the mugs I normally saved for holidays. The kitchen counters were wiped down. The sink was empty, and the guest bathroom smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Upstairs, the bed in the guest room had fresh sheets tucked tight enough to bounce a quarter, the way my mother used to make beds before company came over for Thanksgiving. I stood by the stove in my robe, holding my own cup of coffee, and listened to the house wake up. For 18 years, that house had been quiet in the mornings. Mark used to come downstairs first, rubbing sleep from his eyes, asking where his reading glasses were, even though they were usually sitting on top of his head. I would laugh. He would kiss my cheek, and we would have 10 peaceful minutes before the world started making demands. That was our rhythm. Or at least that was what I had believed. Then his daughter came down the stairs. Ashley Collins was 28 years old, beautiful in a polished, expensive way, with straight blonde hair, perfect nails, and the kind of confidence that made every room feel like it belonged to her. Her husband Tyler followed behind her in sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, yawning like he had spent the night in a hotel he planned to complain about later. Ashley stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she saw the table. For 1 second, she looked surprised. Then she smiled. Not a warm smile, not gratitude, victory. "Well," she said, glancing at Tyler. "See, I told you she'd understand." Tyler gave a sleepy laugh and pulled out a chair. "Smells good." I set a small glass bowl of fruit beside Ashley's plate. "No greasy food," I said gently. Ashley looked at me, trying to decide if there was sarcasm hidden in my voice. There wasn't. I had spent most of my adult life learning that calm, unsettled people more than anger ever could. Mark came down last. He was still buttoning his shirt, his gray hair damp from the shower. And when he saw Ashley sitting at our table, eating the breakfast she had demanded, a visible relief passed across his face. He had expected a fight. He had expected tears, maybe a slammed cabinet, maybe me asking why his daughter and son-in-law had shown up at our door with luggage and a household commandment list as if I were staff. Instead, he saw order. He saw me making peace. That was what he wanted to see. So that was what he saw. "Morning," he said carefully. "Morning," I replied. Ashley picked up her fork. "The eggs are good. A little plain, but that's fine. I'm trying to eat clean again." "I remember," I said. It was on the list. Her eyes flicked toward me again, but I only smiled and turned back to the sink. The list was no longer on the counter, where she had left it the night before. At 5:12 that morning, while the whole house slept, I had taken a photo of it with my phone, placed the original inside a folder, and slid that folder into the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not know yet exactly how far this would go, but I knew enough to preserve what people handed me when they thought I was too weak to use it. The night before had told me everything I needed to know. Ashley had not asked to stay. Tyler had not apologized for the hour. Mark had not stepped between us. He had stood beside the hallway table, one hand on his hip, refusing to meet my eyes while his daughter announced a decision he had made without me. When I looked at him, I was not asking whether the words were true. I was asking whether he understood what they meant. He did. That was why he stayed silent. After breakfast, Ashley pushed her chair back and looked around the kitchen with satisfaction. "We'll probably need space in the pantry. Tyler likes protein bars and I have a few supplements coming." "Of course," Mark said too quickly. I wiped a spot from the counter that did not need wiping. Ashley continued. "And we'll need the left side of the garage. Tyler has equipment." I turned slightly. "Equipment?" Tyler swallowed his coffee. "Just some stuff from work. Tools, boxes, a bike, nothing crazy." Ashley waved a hand. "Dad said there'd be room." There it was again, Dad said. 2 words that turned my home into a property Mark could distribute like extra office supplies. I looked at my husband. He lifted his coffee mug, avoiding my face. Ashley smiled as if the matter had been settled long before I entered the conversation, and maybe it had been. I had met Ashley when she was 10, 2 years after her mother left Mark, and moved to Arizona with a man who sold boats for a living. Ashley had visited us every other weekend at first, then less often during high school, then mostly on holidays after college. I had bought her winter coats, remembered her favorite birthday cakes, mailed care packages during finals week, and sat through entire school concerts where she played 3 notes on the clarinet and looked miserable doing it. I had never asked her to call me mom. I had never competed with the woman who gave birth to her. I had simply tried to be steady. But steadiness can be mistaken for permission by people who only respect force. By 7:30, Mark had left for the office. Tyler had taken a long shower in the bathroom I had cleaned, and Ashley was upstairs organizing, which apparently meant opening closets and deciding which shelves should belong to her. I stood alone in the kitchen, watching sunlight spread across the hardwood floor. My father had refinished with his own hands before he died. That floor was older than my marriage. So was the house. My parents had bought it in 1979, back when the neighborhood was mostly young families, station wagons and maple trees planted too close to the sidewalks. I inherited it before I married Mark. And years later, after my mother's long illness, the house had been placed inside a family trust. Mark knew that. At least he had been told. He had signed documents acknowledging it once in a lawyer's office with stale coffee and beige walls. But people remember what benefits them. By noon, Ashley came downstairs holding a stack of towels. "These are old," she said. "They're clean," she frowned. "I prefer white towels." I looked at the blue towels in her hands, towels my mother had bought on sale at Macy's years ago, and something inside me went very still. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. Ashley seemed pleased, as if she had trained me with one sentence. That afternoon I drove to the grocery store, bought exactly what was needed for the next morning's breakfast, and paid with my own card. On the way home, I sat in the parking lot for a moment with the engine off, watching people move through ordinary errands. A man loaded paper towels into his trunk. An older woman checked eggs before putting them in her cart. A teenage cashier stepped outside for a quick break and tilted her face toward the sun. Life continued even when your marriage shifted under your feet. When I got home, Ashley was in the living room, feet tucked under her on my sofa, speaking into her phone. "Yeah, we're at Dad's house now," she said. "It's just easier. He has plenty of room." Dad's house. I walked past her without correcting it, not because she was right, because I wanted to hear how many times she would say it before the truth arrived. That evening, Mark asked me if I was upset. He asked while standing in the doorway of our bedroom, loosening his tie with the cautious expression of a man who hoped the answer would be convenient. I folded my robe over the chair. "Should I be?" he sighed. "Rachel, come on." Ashley and Tyler hit a rough patch. It's family. Family calls before showing up at 11 at night. They were embarrassed. She didn't look embarrassed. His jaw tightened. "She's my daughter, and I'm your wife." For the first time that day, he looked directly at me. Then he looked away. That small movement did more damage than shouting ever could have. I nodded once slowly, because some answers do not need words. The next morning, I set my alarm for 5:15 again. I made breakfast at 6. I cleaned the bathroom. I washed what was left in the hamper, though I separated my clothes from theirs. I followed the list exactly. Not because I had accepted my place, but because I had finally understood theirs. They thought kindness meant weakness. They thought silence meant surrender. And Mark, my husband of 18 years, had made the worst mistake of all. He had given away authority he never had. By the end of the first week, Ashley had started referring to the guest room as our room, the hallway closet as our storage, and the kitchen as Dad's kitchen. Tyler parked in my spot twice and moved only after I stood in the driveway long enough for him to notice me through the window. I did not yell. I did not cry. I documented every demand, every comment, every assumption, every time Ashley said, "Dad said," because one day soon, I knew those words would matter. And when they did, I wanted everyone to remember exactly who had said what. By the second Monday, Ashley had begun treating the house like a resort, where the staff had been slow to adjust to her standards. She came downstairs that morning in a matching workout set, her hair pulled into a high ponytail, and set a ceramic travel mug beside the coffee maker, as if placing an order at a counter. "Can you make mine with almond milk today?" Tyler's stomach has been weird with regular milk. I was standing at the sink rinsing blueberries for breakfast. The sun had barely climbed over the maple tree in the front yard, and the neighborhood was still quiet except for a garbage truck groaning its way down the street. For years, Monday mornings in that house had belonged to me. I would open the back door for fresh air, listen to the local news on low volume, and drink coffee before Mark came down with his tie crooked. Real now, Ashley was opening cabinets without asking. "I don't have almond milk," I said. She turned annoyed. "I put it on the grocery list yesterday." "The list on the counter?" "Yes, I didn't write that list." Her face tightened for half a second and then she smiled thin and sharp. "Right. I just thought, since you were going to the store anyway." "I bought groceries for the house," I said, placing the blueberries into a bowl. "Not specialty items I wasn't asked about directly." Tyler shuffled in behind her, scratching his jaw. "Regular coffee is fine." Ashley gave him a look. "That's not the point." "No, I thought it never was. The point was whether I would obey before being asked, whether I would anticipate her preferences, whether I would slowly begin shaping my days around her comfort until she no longer had to pretend she was a guest. That was how entitlement settled into a home. Not all at once, inch by inch, shelf by shelf, mug by mug. Mark came downstairs a few minutes later, kissed Ashley on top of the head, and reached past me for coffee. He did not kiss me. He had stopped doing that sometime after the suitcases arrived, though I was not sure he had noticed. "Big week," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "Let's all just keep things smooth, okay?" Ashley nodded as if he had addressed me. I set breakfast on the table. Egg whites again, toast, fruit, coffee, no greasy food, exactly as requested. Ashley sat and looked at the plate. "Could we do oatmeal tomorrow? Steel cut, not instant." "I'll keep that in mind." She smiled, satisfied, and Mark looked relieved. Relief had become his favorite emotion around me. As long as I did not force him to choose, he could pretend he had not already chosen. After they left the kitchen, I carried my coffee to the small office off the dining room, closed the door, and opened my laptop. The room had once been my father's den. His old oak desk still sat under the window, heavy and scratched, with one drawer that stuck in damp weather. I had kept it because it reminded me of him. Mark had always called it too bulky, and Ashley had already suggested that Tyler could use the office for his gear. I logged into my bank account and began separating what should have been separated long ago. First, I moved my direct deposit to an individual checking account I had opened years earlier and rarely used. Then I changed the automatic payments connected to my personal credit card, my car insurance, my cell phone, and the trust's property expenses. I did not touch anything illegal. I did not hide money that belonged to Mark. I simply stopped letting my earnings float through the same pond where everyone had started fishing without permission. After that, I emailed my CPA, then the attorney who had handled my mother's estate, then the trust office downtown. I kept the messages short. "There are uninvited long-term occupants in the property. My husband authorized them without my consent. I need to understand my legal options before this becomes a residency issue." I read it 3 times before sending. Then I sent it. My hands did not shake until afterward. That surprised me. People think strength feels like anger, but it often feels like grief with a calendar attached. You make phone calls. You gather documents. You put one foot in front of the other while something inside you quietly breaks. At lunch, Ashley appeared in the office doorway without knocking. "What are you doing?" "Work." She leaned against the frame. "From home some days." "Oh, I thought you mostly handled house stuff." I looked up at her. "Did Mark tell you that?" She shrugged. "Dad said you had a flexible schedule." Flexible? That was a word people loved using when they meant available. "I do consulting," I said. "I also manage the trust." Ashley blinked. "What trust?" I held her gaze for a moment, then closed my laptop. "Nothing you need to worry about." She stared as if she could sense a door had closed, even if she did not know which one. Then she gave a little laugh. "Well, Tyler needs somewhere to take calls in the afternoon, so maybe you could work upstairs or at the kitchen table." "No." The word landed softly, but it landed. Ashley's expression shifted. She was not used to hearing it from me. "No," she repeated. "This office is mine." She pushed away from the doorframe. "It's Dad's house, Rachel." There it was again, polished and confident. I smiled. "Is it?" For a second, she had no answer. Then she rolled her eyes, walked away, and called upstairs. "Tyler, We'll figure something else out. That night, Mark confronted me in the laundry room while I was pulling shirts from the washer. Me his shirts. Tyler's shirts. Ashley's delicate blouses that came with instructions longer than a prescription label. I had washed them exactly as the list demanded. Hand-washed, rinsed, pressed between towels, hung to dry, never folded. "Did you tell Ashley she couldn't use the office?" he asked. I told her Tyler couldn't. His face tightened. "Rachel, they're under a lot of pressure, so am I. They lost their apartment." I paused with one of his shirts in my hands. "They lost it, or they gave it up because they knew you'd let them move in here." He did not answer fast enough. That was when I understood. I lowered the shirt slowly. "How long did you know?" Mark rubbed his forehead. "A few weeks." "A few weeks." They were behind. Okay, their lease was ending. Tyler's hours got cut. Ashley was embarrassed. "And I didn't want you to make her feel worse." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the cruelty of that sentence had arrived, dressed as concern. "You didn't want me to make her feel worse," I said. "So you let her arrive at 11 at night and hand me a chore list in my own foyer." He looked away again. "I thought if you saw they needed help, you'd understand. You didn't ask me to help. You volunteered me." His mouth opened, then closed. In the old days, I might have filled the silence for him. I might have softened the sentence, offered a bridge, given him somewhere comfortable to stand. Women are often trained to protect everyone from the truth, even the people hurting them. I was done doing that. The following days settled into a strange performance. I made breakfast at 6. I cleaned what the list required. I ironed shirts and hung them with careful spacing in the guest room closet. Ashley grew more comfortable, more careless. She ordered packages every afternoon and left the boxes by the front door. Tyler took calls in the living room with his laptop balanced on my grandmother's coffee table. Mark came home later and later, grateful for any evening that did not require him to face the mess he had made. Meanwhile, I collected information. The trust attorney replied by Thursday. Her name was Elaine Porter, and she had known my mother before she knew me. Her email was calm, professional, and devastating. "The property remains trusted. Your husband has no ownership interest. Unauthorized long-term occupants should not be allowed to establish residency without written agreement. Document everything. Do not accept rent until we speak." I read that email 3 times. Then I printed it and placed it in the folder with Ashley's list. On Friday evening, Ashley invited 2 friends over without asking. They drank sparkling wine in the kitchen and laughed too loudly while Tyler grilled chicken on the back patio. When I walked in to get a glass of water, Ashley lifted her phone and said, "We're just celebrating finally having a stable place again." One of her friends smiled at me. "This house is gorgeous." Ashley said it's her dad's. I looked at Ashley. Ashley looked back, daring me to correct her. I took my water from the dispenser, calm as Sunday morning, and said, "It's been in my family for a long time." The friend's smile faded slightly. Ashley's jaw tightened. Before she could respond, Mark stepped in from the patio and said, "Rachel, can we not?" 3 small words. Can we not? Not Ashley, be respectful. Not, this is Rachel's home too. Not even let's talk later. Just a public request for me to swallow the truth, so his daughter would not be embarrassed by her lie. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in my father's office and called Elaine's voicemail. "It's Rachel," I said quietly. "I'm ready to schedule a meeting. I want to do this legally, cleanly, and without cruelty, but I want them out before they forget. They were never invited by the persons who actually had the right to invite them." Then I hung up, placed the phone on the desk, and looked out at the dark yard where my father had once planted tomatoes every summer. For the first time since the suitcases arrived, I felt something besides betrayal. I felt prepared. Elaine Porter's office was on the 4th floor of a brick building downtown, 2 blocks from the county courthouse and across the street from a diner where my father used to take me for pancakes after dentist appointments. The building smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, and the elevator made the same tired humming sound it had probably made since the 1980s. I arrived 10 minutes early because my mother had raised me to believe that being late was a kind of disrespect, and I sat in the waiting room with my purse on my lap, staring at a framed watercolor of the courthouse clock tower. Elaine came out herself instead of sending an assistant. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, neat, and sharp-eyed with the calm expression of a woman who had spent decades watching families discover what money and property could reveal about them. She took both my hands in hers and said, "Rachel, I'm sorry you're dealing with this." That nearly undid me. Not Mark's silence, not Ashley's list, not Tyler parking in my driveway like he had won a prize. Kindness. I swallowed hard and nodded. "I should have called sooner. You called when you were ready," Elaine said. Inside her office, she spread the documents across the table with the careful patience of someone laying out a map. There was the original deed from my parents' purchase of the house, the transfer into my name after my father died, the trust documents created during my mother's illness, and the acknowledgement Mark had signed 12 years earlier when the trust was updated. His signature sat on the last page in blue ink, slightly slanted, familiar enough to make my chest hurt. "He knew," I said quietly. Elaine looked over her glasses. "He was informed. Whether he absorbed it is another matter." "That sounds generous. It is legally safer to be precise." I almost smiled. "My mother liked you. Your mother liked facts." I looked down at the papers. My mother had liked facts and clean windows and black coffee and never letting people confuse politeness with permission. She had also liked Mark once. She had believed he was steady. Maybe he had been for a while. People do not always reveal themselves all at once. Sometimes they wait until comfort makes them careless. Elaine folded her hands. "Ashley and Tyler were allowed into the property by your husband. But your husband does not have legal authority to grant them open-ended occupancy. However, because they are physically there and have brought belongings, we need to be careful. You do not change locks. You do not remove their belongings. You do not threaten them. We document, we give written notice, and we create a clear record." "I don't want to be cruel," I said. "I know, but I want my house back." Elaine nodded. "That is not cruelty." On the drive home, I passed a school bus unloading children in front of a row of ranch houses, a man mowing his lawn in cargo shorts, and two women walking small dogs under the bright yellow leaves of early fall. Ordinary life had a strange way of looking almost offensive when your own life was rearranging itself. The world did not pause for betrayal. It kept selling coffee, delivering mail, and changing traffic lights. When I pulled into the driveway, Tyler's bike was leaning against the garage door, blocking my side again. I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, and looked at it. Then I took a photo. By then, I had learned that documentation was a language of its own. It was quiet. It did not make threats. It did not slam doors. It simply waited for the day someone powerful enough to matter asked, "Can you prove that?" Yes, I could. Inside, Ashley was standing in the kitchen with a tape measure, talking on speakerphone. "No, I think a sectional would fit if we move that old cabinet," she said. "The whole room is kind of dated, but we can work with it." The old cabinet was my mother's hutch. I set my keys in the bowl by the door. "What are you measuring?" Ashley ended the call without apology. "The living room. Tyler's mom has a sectional in storage, and she said we could use it." "We don't need a sectional." Ashley laughed lightly. "Rachel, no offense, but this setup worked when it was just you and Dad. Now there are 4 adults here." "No," I said, "there are snorts 2 adults who live here, and 2 adults who are guests." The room went very still. Ashley lowered the tape measure. "Guests?" "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "Dad said we could stay as long as we needed." "Dad did not have the right to say that." She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Are you serious right now?" "Very." She stepped closer, her voice dropping into the tone people use when they think volume is the only thing separating them from authority. "This is my father's house." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw something underneath the arrogance. Fear, not guilt, not yet. Fear dressed up as entitlement because entitlement was easier to wear in public. "Ashley," I said calmly, "you should ask your father to show you the deed." Her face changed. "Not much, just enough." Then she scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "Maybe." I walked past her into the office and closed the door. That evening, Mark came home angry, which told me Ashley had called him before his car reached the driveway. He found me in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, because despite everything, people still needed to eat. And I still preferred soup from scratch when the weather turned cool. "What did you say to Ashley?" he demanded. I kept chopping carrots. Many things over the years. Which one upset her today? "Don't do that." I set the knife down. I told her she was a guest. She's my daughter. She is not a homeowner. Mark's face flushed. "You're really going to make this about paperwork?" "No, Mark. You made this about paperwork when you gave permission to move into a house you don't own." The words landed between us like broken glass. For a second, he looked stunned, then angry, then something close to ashamed, though it passed quickly. "I've lived here 18 years, he said. "Yes, I've paid bills here. Yes, I helped replace the furnace. I paid for half the roof. You contributed to marital expenses in a home where you lived." His mouth tightened. "You sound like a lawyer. I saw one today." That silenced him. From the hallway, I heard Ashley's door open upstairs. Of course, she was listening. Tyler too, probably. Houses carry sound, especially when everyone inside is waiting for a fight. Mark lowered his voice. "Rachel, don't escalate this." I almost laughed. They showed up at 11 at night with suitcases and a chore list. They needed help. And I needed a husband. He flinched then, not enough to apologize, but enough to show he had heard me. The next morning, I did exactly what I had done every morning since Ashley arrived. I woke at 5:15, made breakfast, wiped the counters, checked the bathroom, and folded my own towel over the rack in the neat way my mother had taught me. I did not hand wash Ashley's clothes that day, because there were none in the hamper by 6 a.m. And the list had not said I had to search bedrooms for laundry. Ashley came down late, irritated. "Where's my white blouse?" "I don't know. I left it on the chair." "Your list said hand wash work clothes. It didn't say collect them from bedrooms." Tyler snorted into his coffee before he could stop himself. Ashley turned on him so fast he looked down at his plate. Mark rubbed his temples. "Can we please not start the morning like this?" I placed a folder on the dining table. Not the legal one, not yet. This folder was simple, neat, and printed on plain white paper. I had prepared it after my meeting with Elaine, and I had waited until everyone was at the same table, because some truths should not be whispered in hallways. Ashley stared at it. "What's that?" I sat down across from her. "Since we are sharing the house, these are the homeowner's rules." Mark went still. Ashley laughed. "Excuse me." I opened the folder and slid 3 copies across the table. A temporary occupancy agreement. It outlines rent, utilities, food contributions, guest restrictions, parking, liability, cleaning expectations, property damage responsibility, and a 30-day limit unless renewed in writing. Tyler reached for a copy, but Ashley slapped her hand over it. "We're not signing anything. That's your choice." "This is insane," she said. "You're trying to charge us rent to live in Dad's house." I looked at Mark. He said nothing again. Only this time, his silence did not protect him. It condemned him. Ashley shoved the papers back toward me. "No." Then, with a small theatrical smile, she tore the top sheet in half. The sound was soft, almost delicate. Mark whispered, "Ashley," but he did not stop her. I gathered the torn pieces, placed them back in the folder, and stood. "Thank you," I said. Ashley blinked. "For what?" "For making your position clear." I walked into my father's office, scanned the torn pages, attached the file to an email, and sent it to Elaine. Subject line: refusal to sign. For the first time in days, my hands were perfectly steady. The first formal notice arrived by certified mail on a Wednesday afternoon, and Ashley treated it like junk. I knew because I was in the kitchen when the mail carrier rang the bell, and I watched through the front window as Tyler signed for the envelope in pajama pants and socks. He turned it over once, saw the law firm's name in the corner, and carried it upstairs like a man delivering bad weather to someone else. 5 minutes later, Ashley came down holding the envelope between 2 fingers. "Me? What is this?" she asked. I was washing lettuce at the sink, cold water running over my hands. "It looks like mail. Don't be cute." "I'm not." She slapped the envelope on the counter. "You had a lawyer send us a notice." "I had my lawyer communicate in writing." "For what?" "For the same reason I gave you an occupancy agreement. Clarity." Ashley's face went pink. "We're not tenants." "No," I said, turning off the faucet. "You're unauthorized occupants who refused to sign a temporary agreement." Her mouth opened, then closed, as if the phrase itself offended her. People like Ashley loved the comfort of adult privileges, But the moment adult consequences arrived, they acted as though language had become abusive. Mark came home early that day. That alone told me she had called him. He walked in wearing his navy suit and that tired expression he used whenever he wanted me to make a hard thing easier for him. I was in the laundry room removing my own clothes from the dryer. Only mine. Ashley had started leaving her blouses in a silk pile on the guest room chair again, and I had stopped rescuing them. "We need to talk," he said. I folded a sweater over my arm. "The talk." He looked toward the hallway privately. "This concerns everyone." His jaw tightened. "Rachel." I put the sweater in the basket and faced him. "You want privacy now?" That stopped him. For a moment I saw the old Mark under the defensiveness. The man who used to bring me gas station coffee on long road trips, and knew I liked the cheap powdered creamer more than the fancy kind. I had loved that man. I had built a life with that man. But love does not erase the record. It only makes reading it hurt more. He lowered his voice. "You're scaring Ashley. She should be worried. She's family. She is an adult woman who moved into my home without permission and handed me a housekeeping list. She didn't mean it like that." I let out a breath. "Mark, she meant every word, and you let her." From upstairs came the faint sound of a drawer closing too hard. Ashley was listening again. Mark stepped closer. "Can't you just give them time?" I offered 30 days with written rules. They don't have money for rent. Then they should have asked for help, not command. He rubbed his forehead. Tyler's hours were cut. Ashley's trying to find something better. They're embarrassed. Then why do they have enough pride to give orders, but not enough humility to apologize? He had no answer. Because the answer would have required him to admit that he had raised his daughter, to believe my kindness was a family resource. Over the next week, the house became colder without the weather changing. Ashley no longer smiled at breakfast. Tyler stopped making eye contact. Mark slept on the far side of the bed, facing the wall, as though distance could excuse silence. I continued moving through my mornings with the same quiet precision I had always had. But something essential had shifted. I was no longer maintaining a marriage. I was maintaining evidence. Elaine told me to document refusals, disturbances, property interference, and any attempt to claim ownership. So, I did. When Ashley left 3 bags of trash in the garage because Dad said pickup was Monday, I took a picture. When Tyler blocked my car again, I took a picture. Me. When Ashley's friend came over and stayed until nearly midnight on a weeknight, laughing loudly on the patio while Mark pretended to watch television, I wrote down the time. I did not do it to punish them. I did it because fairness requires memory. Without records, the loudest person often becomes the believed person. By the 3rd week, money began doing what truth had not yet done. It applied pressure. Mark had always been generous when generosity cost him nothing. He liked paying for dinners, slipping Ashley extra cash on birthdays, fixing things before anyone asked, and calling it love. But once I separated my paycheck and stopped covering groceries for 4 adults, the numbers changed quickly. He was buying protein bars, almond milk, cleaning supplies. Ashley preferred extra coffee, extra utilities, extra gas for Tyler's borrowed commute, and still paying his own credit cards from choices he had made before the suitcases arrived. One evening, I heard Ashley and Mark arguing in the kitchen. "I thought you said this would be temporary," Mark said. "It is temporary," Ashley snapped, "but we can't move until Tyler's schedule stabilizes. You said that 2 weeks ago, and you said Rachel would be fine with it." There it was. "The first crack," Tyler muttered. "Maybe we should look at cheaper places." Ashley turned on him. "With what money, Tyler?" I stayed in the hallway holding a basket of towels and listened long enough to understand that the alliance was weakening, not because anyone had grown kinder, because comfort had become expensive. The second notice arrived the following Monday. This one Ashley opened in the dining room in front of Mark and Tyler. I was setting down soup bowls for dinner, a habit I had not yet abandoned because feeding people was not the same as surrendering to them. There was chicken noodle soup, warm bread, and a green salad no one appreciated. Ashley read the notice, then laughed too loudly. "This is harassment." Tyler leaned toward her. "What does it say?" "It says we have to vacate." Mark looked at me. "Rachel." I sat across from him. "You were all notified properly. You can't kick my daughter out before Thanksgiving." It is early October. She needs stability. So do I. Ashley dropped the letter on the table. I'm not leaving. I looked at her for a long moment. Then the court will decide. She smiled, but there was fear underneath it now, plain as daylight through thin curtains. Dad owns this house. Mark did not correct her. He did not confirm it either. He just stared at his soup. That was the first time I saw Ashley look uncertainly at her father. Not angry, not smug, uncertain, as if she had been standing on a bridge and had suddenly heard wood crack beneath her feet. The next morning, the county clerk's office accepted the filing. Elaine emailed me the confirmation at 10:17 a.m. While Ashley was upstairs complaining on the phone, and Tyler was in the driveway trying to jump-start his car. I read the message in my father's office with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. The legal process had begun. There was no satisfaction in that moment. Not yet. Just a deep, heavy sadness that this was what it had taken to be heard. That night, Mark stood in the office doorway. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I could have given him a legal answer. I could have talked about liability, occupancy, trust, assets, boundaries, disrespect, documents, notices, and every warning he had ignored. But the truth was simpler. I looked around the room my father had loved, at the desk he had left me, at the window my mother had cleaned every spring, at the walls that had held birthdays, funerals, Christmas mornings, quiet dinners, and 18 years of a marriage I had tried to honor. Then I looked back at my husband. "I'm protecting what's mine," I said. He swallowed. "From Ashley?" "No, Mark." His eyes met mine. "From you?" The hearing was scheduled for the first Tuesday in November. Elaine had warned me not to expect a dramatic courtroom scene. Housing matters are usually straightforward, she had said. The excitement only exists in television shows. She was right. Real life was quieter. Real life was paperwork, calendars, signatures, and people discovering that assumptions were not evidence. During the 2 weeks leading up to the hearing, the atmosphere inside the house deteriorated in ways I never could have imagined. Ashley stopped speaking to me unless she absolutely had to. Tyler spent more time outside than inside, sitting in his truck with the engine off, scrolling through job listings, or staring through the windshield. More than once, I caught him looking exhausted, like a man who had slowly realized he had followed someone else's confidence into a situation he no longer understood. Mark tried to play peacemaker. That had become his favorite role. Not husband, not father, peacemaker. The problem was that peace built on dishonesty eventually collapses under its own weight. One Saturday morning, he found me trimming the rose bushes my mother had planted 20 years earlier. "Can we talk?" I kept clipping dead branches. "We've talked." "No, really talk." I looked up. His shoulders sagged. "I've made mistakes." I waited. "I shouldn't have let Ashley come over without asking you." "No, I shouldn't have let her hand you that list." "No, I shouldn't have stayed quiet." Finally, there it was. The truth. Not the whole truth, but enough of it to matter. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought you'd calm down after a few days." "I did." He frowned. "No," I corrected gently. I became clear. That sentence seemed to confuse him more than any argument ever had. People often mistake calm for forgiveness. They are not the same thing. The following Monday, Tyler knocked on my office door. He actually knocked. It was the first time either of them had done that. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." He stepped inside awkwardly, leaving the door open behind him. I wanted to apologize. I remained silent. "I shouldn't have let Ashley treat you the way she did." "No, I shouldn't have parked in your spot." "No, I shouldn't have assumed." He looked around the office and that this was ours. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I believed what Ashley believed. And what was that? That if Mark said yes, he stopped. Then that was enough. I nodded. It wasn't. "No." He swallowed. "I know that now." For the first time since all of this began, I felt genuine sympathy. Not because Tyler was innocent. He wasn't. He had enjoyed the convenience. He had benefited from the arrangement. But unlike Ashley, he was capable of recognizing his mistake. "Have you found work?" I asked. "A better position starts next month." "Congratulations," he smiled weakly. "I wish it had happened sooner." "So do I." He stood. "I don't know what's going to happen Tuesday." "I do." He looked surprised. "Is going to follow the law." He nodded slowly. Then he quietly left. That evening, Ashley exploded. She had apparently learned Tyler had spoken to me. You apologized to her? Tyler didn't answer. You actually apologized? I owed her one. Ashley slammed a cabinet so hard a serving bowl rattled. You are unbelievable. No, Tyler replied quietly. I was unbelievable 3 weeks ago. Mark watched from the dining room without saying a word again. Ashley turned toward her father. Say something. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She stared at him. Dad, he looked exhausted. Ash. No, she folded her arms. You told us this was your house. It is. He stopped himself. It isn't. Silence. For the first time since moving in, Ashley looked frightened. Real fear. Not anger, not embarrassment. Fear. She turned back toward Tyler. He's lying. Tyler didn't answer. She looked at me. You're lying. I simply stood there. You forged something. No, my dad owns this house. I said nothing. She laughed, a short, nervous laugh. This is ridiculous. Then she walked upstairs and slammed the bedroom door. The house shook, not from the force of the slam, from the illusion finally beginning to collapse. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. Elaine met me outside the courthouse. She carried 2 neat binders, one blue, one black. Ready? As I'll ever be. Inside, everything moved with surprising efficiency. Cases were called. People stepped forward. Lawyers spoke quietly. Judges asked practical questions. Nobody yelled. Nobody pounded tables. Real courts don't need drama. Ain't facts create enough of their own. When our case was called, Ashley walked confidently beside Mark. Tyler followed several steps behind. The judge greeted everyone politely. Elaine introduced herself. Then Ashley spoke before anyone asked her to. We live with my father. The judge nodded. And who owns the property? My father. The judge made a note. Elaine didn't interrupt. She simply waited. Patience, I had learned, is often the strongest form of confidence. The judge turned toward Mark. Sir, do you agree with your daughter's statement? Mark hesitated. Too long. Ashley looked at him. Dad, he looked toward me, then toward Elaine. Then back to the judge. I've lived there for 18 years. That wasn't my question. The courtroom became perfectly still. Do you own the property? Mark swallowed. Elaine quietly slid the blue binder toward the clerk. Your Honor, may I? The judge nodded. Inside were the trust documents, the original deed, the transfer, the recorded filings, the trust amendments, tax records, insurance records, everything neatly tabbed, chronological, impossible to misunderstand. The judge reviewed the first pages carefully. Then another, then another. Ashley kept smiling. She still believed there had to be another page somewhere, with Mark's name waiting to appear. There wasn't. Finally, the judge looked up. Mr. Collins. Mark closed his eyes for a second. Us. Can you produce any document showing ownership? Silence. The longest silence of the entire hearing. Ashley slowly turned toward her father. Dad. He couldn't look at her. Not anymore. For the first time since she had marched through my front door declaring. Dad said, we're moving in. She realized there was one question she had never asked. Did he actually have the right to say that? The answer was about to change everything. The judge did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He looked at Mark over the top of the documents and asked again slowly, Can you produce any document showing ownership of the property? Mark's hands were folded in front of him, but his knuckles had gone pale. Ashley stared at him as if she could force an answer into existence by sheer disbelief. Tyler stood a few feet behind her, jaw tight, eyes lowered, already understanding what she refused to accept. No, Mark said at last, one word, quiet, final. Ashley's face changed in stages. First confusion, then anger, then panic. Dad, what are you talking about? Mark closed his eyes. Ashley. No, you said it was your house. I said we lived there. No, she snapped loud enough that the judge looked up sharply. You said it was your house. Elaine stood beside me, calm as stone. I did not look at Ashley. I looked at Mark, because this had always been about him. Ashley had been rude, entitled, and cruel, but she had walked through my door holding the confidence her father had handed her. He had given away permission that did not belong to him. And then, when the truth had begun to matter, he had hidden behind silence. The judge ordered the occupancy terminated and set a date for enforcement if Ashley and Tyler did not leave voluntarily. It was not theatrical. There was no gavel strike that echoed through the room. There was simply a legal conclusion entered into the record, while Ashley stood there with tears in her eyes. furious at a world that had stopped bending around what her father promised. Outside the courtroom, Mark caught up with me near the courthouse steps. "Rachel, please." The November air was cold, and people moved around us carrying folders, coffee cups, and small private disasters of their own. "I need time," he said. "You had time?" I didn't understand how serious this was. I turned to him then. "You understood the night she handed me that list." His face crumpled slightly. "You understood when I looked at you and you said nothing. You understood when she called it your house. You understood when I gave them papers to sign and she tore them up. You understood every time you chose convenience over truth." He swallowed hard. "I didn't want to lose my daughter. And you were willing to lose your wife?" He had no answer. 3 days later, Ashley and Tyler still had not packed. That was the final insult. Though by then it felt almost predictable. Ashley believed consequences could still be negotiated by refusing to move. Tyler looked ashamed. But shame without action is only another kind of permission. So on a cold Friday morning, sheriff's deputies arrived with Elaine. No one shouted at first. A deputy knocked. Mark opened the door looking like he had not slept. Ashley appeared behind him in a sweatshirt, her hair unbrushed, her confidence finally gone but not her pride. "This is ridiculous," she said. Elaine handed a copy of the order to the deputy, then turned to Mark. "Mr. Collins," she said, her voice professional but not unkind, "you have never owned any part of this property." The sentence landed exactly where it needed to. Not on Ashley, not on Tyler, on Mark. His shoulders dropped. Ashley's eyes filled again, but this time she did not argue immediately. She looked around the foyer at the staircase, the framed photographs, the old wooden floor, the home she had claimed as her father's, without ever wondering whose history lived inside the walls. The Tyler packed first. He carried boxes down quietly, apologizing once when he bumped the banister. Ashley stood in the guest room for nearly 20 minutes before she began folding clothes into her suitcase. Not hanging, not arranging, folding. I noticed, so did she. Near noon, she came downstairs holding the torn-looking remains of her dignity, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked at me without contempt. "I shouldn't have given you that list," she said. "No," I replied. "You shouldn't have." She glanced toward Mark, then back at me. "I thought he had already talked to you. That would not have made the list acceptable." Her mouth trembled. I know. I believe that she did know, at least in that moment. Maybe embarrassment had taught her what kindness had not. Maybe losing had made room for humility. I did not need to decide whether she had changed forever. I only needed to decide what I would allow in my life. "I accept your apology," I said, "but you still have to leave." She nodded once, crying now, and walked out with Tyler. Mark remained in the foyer after the last suitcase crossed the threshold. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Can we fix this?" I looked past him to the open front door, where the cold air moved through my house like a cleansing breath. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but not while you still think fixing it means I forget what happened." He covered his face with one hand. "I loved you, Mark. I built a life with you. But love is not a license to give away my dignity, my labor, or my home." He nodded, and for once he did not defend himself. That was something. It was not enough. In the weeks that followed, Mark moved into a rental apartment across town. Ashley and Tyler found a small place near his new job. And months later, Tyler mailed me a handwritten note, thanking me for forcing them to grow up before their marriage became nothing but blame. Ashley did not write, but she sent back my mother's blue towels, washed and folded neatly in a cardboard box. I kept them, not because I needed towels, because sometimes closure arrives in strange forms. I stayed in the house. I repainted the guest room a soft green, turned my father's office into a brighter workspace, and started having Sunday dinners with friends who brought food without being asked, and cleared plates without needing praise. For a long time, I thought revenge meant making people hurt the way they hurt you. I learned it can be something quieter. It can be refusing to carry someone else's entitlement one more day. It can be letting the law, the truth, and your own boundaries do what anger never could. Mark's betrayal was not that he loved his daughter. A father should love his daughter. His betrayal was that he used my kindness as currency, spent my silence like permission, and stood by while someone treated me like staff in a house built by my family's sacrifices. That is what I finally understood. Peace without respect is not peace, it is surrender, and I was done surrendering. If this story made you think of someone who mistook your kindness for weakness, I hope you remember this. Boundaries are not cruelty, and protecting what is yours does not make you selfish. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not yelling, not begging, and not proving your worth to people determined to ignore it. Sometimes it is standing calmly in the truth until everyone else has no choice but to see it. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me whether you would have handled it the same way, and if you believe respect can survive after betrayal. And if you want more emotional stories about family, marriage, truth, and quiet justice, please like, subscribe, and come back for the next one.